Okay, I think we can begin. If people join us, they can, join midstream. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is actually the first of a three-part series, which I think is going to be on grand strategy and how to understand the dynamics of history and world politics. I know this is on everybody's mind, and it's very appropriate right now because there's a lot of developments occurring in the world, and one needs to actually have a not a framework, but an understanding of the dynamics of history and great history and politics to be able to make sense of what's going on, and most importantly, to organize among ourselves a strategy for how to turn this very complex situation into one which has a favorable outcome for the United States and for mankind. So this will be the first discussion tonight, which will be between Tony and I and you. The idea is to engage you in a discussion about current events as understood from the of history and strategy, as known as LaRouche outlined, and he wrote many articles on this, history as art, many discussions about how to understand history, not from the standpoint of a historian, but from the standpoint of a strategist who is to change history. So we're going to be exploring that tonight, especially from the standpoint of the current crisis, which is not what you see on the news, but what is actually occurring in the world. So Tony and I are going to begin with a little dialogue, and then we'll open it up for discussions so that everybody can participate on this.
The current so-called sanctions against Russia which is a worldwide, totally destructive thing, were planned long before the Russian attack on Ukraine, and they were planned not especially against Russia. They were planned independently of whether Russia would attack Ukraine or not. They could just as well have been sanctions against China. The sanctions campaign, which was supposedly unleashed in response to the Russian attack on Ukraine, as I say, was planned long before, and its purposes are very far-reaching and wide, and go way, and its effects as well, and they go way beyond anything involving Russia or Ukraine. And I'll go through that in certain aspects, and people may raise other aspects of it in Q&A. The effects of this sanctions program are murderous, you might even say genocidal. Not in Russia at this point. I mean, Russia has suffered somewhat from them, but not so much in Russia as in poor countries in the Southern Hemisphere, and most immediately at the moment in the Middle East. The World Food Program, Brian Lance wrote me, the World Food Program has documented that already, because of these sanctions, which are supposedly against Russia, the price of cooking oil in Yemen has risen 36%. The price of cooking oil in Syria has risen 39%. These, of course, are food poor countries, as I think you all know. The price of wheat flour in Lebanon has risen 47%, in Libya 15%, in Palestine 14%. And this is only the least of, and the World Food Program is saying it has no way to deal with the effects which have already appeared. And this is only after weeks. So now, how were these sanctions planned, or what's the intention, the overall intention? it's part of an overall thrust or drive by the imperial system centered in London, which could be called and has been called in the past, including by Lyndon LaRouche, permanent war and permanent revolution. And as I wrote in my article, which is up on the website, Biden referred to this, not by those words, but Biden referred to this in his remarks at the White House on March 21st, which were widely noted because he used the words New World Order. But what was the New World Order he was describing? It was, what he described was that the world was in his view of it, or the view he was told to think, the world was in relative peace and stability from sometime during the 19th century under the British Empire until the outbreak of World War I. And then from the beginning of World War I till the end of World War II, 60 million people were killed in wars. And then again, in his view of it, since sometime after the end of World War II, we've had a period of relative stability. And this is a one-sided view, but that's what he was told to think. Now we're returning to the conditions like those of 1914, in which tens of millions, or more likely, if this is allowed to occur, hundreds of millions will die in war and famines as the effect of economic dislocation, which is being done deliberately under the cover of sanctions on Russia. I mean, as I wrote, this is a policy, or it's a policy, a broad policy pursued by the oligarchy under one of the headings is DeGlobalization. Okay. That the globalized system, which in their telling of it's far from true, has provided prosperity and peace, is coming to an end. And we're entering a period of economic dislocation, separation into opposing blocks of nations economically, and the international war of all against all, or really more accurately, NATO against everybody else. I mean, just to illustrate that further, I guess, the Biden administration has released, although it's not yet public, their national security strategy. It was written over the preceding months. Even in the release, of course, this is a question of picking enemies, so-called US enemies in the world, what we're going to do against them. So even at the time it was released, in the midst of this Ukraine war, it targeted China as the top adversary of the United States, and not Russia. So the point I'm making here, of course, is that this is a much larger policy. It's broader implications. It's not about Russia. It's not about China. It's about, among other things, the depopulation of the world. This is the thrust of the Paris Accords, COP26, the Green New Deal. I mean, the Paris Accords, COP26, and the Green New Deal say that the world must cease use of fossil fuels. What that means is to push back all economic progress since the Middle Ages, when fossil fuels were first introduced. And it means to reduce what these people call the carrying capacity, or to reduce the potential population of the entire world from 7 billions roughly today back to hundreds of millions in the Middle Ages. So the Green New Deal attests to the same policy, or another way of saying it is the so-called sanctions policy against Russia is not really a sanctions policy against Russia, but it's part of the worldwide COP26 Paris Accords Green New Deal, or the Davos policy for depopulating the globe, which is what that policy is intended to do. And the members of the top British elite circles and the British royals themselves have been quite frank in saying, in their own words, from the 18th century through the 19th century into the 20th century to today, actually, that the world has too many people. World levels of population are being reduced. So at the moment, they're being reduced not only by green policies, but by these so-called Russia sanctions. Now, I mean, again, I'm going to go into more detail on this, and I'm not asking you to take it on faith by any means. We'll go into it more in discussion, but that's really the first point I want to make. And with that, I want to note that we as Americans, or most, not all, but most of the people on this call are Americans. And those who aren't really are sympathizers and supporters of the American project, I think. We as Americans have a special responsibility in this situation. In 2006, Lyndon LaRouche wrote about this, and just this kind of situation, and said that the most powerful potential enemy of globalization, and admittedly, the globalizers are now using the slogan DeGlobalization, but regardless, he wrote the most powerful potential enemy of globalization is patriotism. If nations retake the power to govern and to make laws according to the principle, and make laws according to the universal Christian and similar principle of promotion of the general welfare, then the power of usury, which is another word for the global oligarchy we're fighting, the power of usury is helpless in the face of justice activated by national law. So, I mean, this global green agenda is a war against the sovereign nation state, pretty much, admittedly so, if you read their material. It's a war against the sovereign nation state. And the United States is the most advanced form of sovereign nation state. I mean, it's not coincidentally, the oldest still existing republic in the world, but it's the first nation that was founded explicitly to be a republic. And it's the natural leader, whatever may be the case now with Joe Biden and those who are telling him what to think. It's the natural leader of the potential world community of sovereign nation states. So we have as I say, we have a critical role as Americans in defeating this. And we have, as President Trump says repeatedly, and he probably is saying right now, where he's speaking here in Michigan, we have not been defeated, far from it. Our greatest victories are ahead of us. Our movement has only begun. So we have a leadership role in stopping what is emblemized right now, or what is spearheaded right now by the so-called Russia sanctions. And as I indicated a minute ago, we've only begun to fight. Now, what are some of the elements of the policy seen in the so-called Russia sanctions? I mean, one is the deliberate triggering of global economic depression. That's what's going on. I mean, global economic depression creates a very precarious system for our adversaries in the financier class. In a sense, it makes it much easier to overthrow them, but they've been driven to such a state of desperation that they're pulling down the whole house on top of themselves in the hope that somehow they can crush the opposition to their rule and collapsing the house on everyone. If you doubt or if you question that such forces would deliberately trigger a depression, you have to look no further than the COVID lockdowns. I mean, whatever the COVID lockdowns justification was, when it was 3 weeks to slow the spread or 2 weeks to slow the spread, I don't recall which or both of them. But the justification for continuing them over months or years, there was no conceivable medical or scientific justification. What we had was deliberate triggering of pretty much worldwide economic depression, which the world has yet to get out of, as now this new blow of so-called Russia sanctions descends on us. So, I mean, these forces have shown they will do that. They're doing it deliberately now. And it's a much bigger issue than Russia or Ukraine, or Russia's attacks on Ukraine. And then, I mean, I discussed, or I pointed to it, central to the whole thing, the Paris Accords, the COP26, the Green New Deal, and all this. I mean, you should understand, think about the fact, you probably have, that the Biden administration, the electorate is fed up with the Biden administration. I mean, as things are, the administration will be defeated overwhelmingly in the midterms and then in 2024. And one of the things which makes them the most hated is, of course, the price of gasoline, the price of fossil fuels, or more broadly, their refusal in the face of a catastrophic growing shortage of oil, natural gas, their refusal to take even half a step backward on the Green New Deal. The fact is, the financier masters of the Biden administration will not let them move 1 inch from that Green New Deal policy, no matter if they go down to defeat on that alone. They're not given permission, as perhaps Zelensky has not been given permission to negotiate with Russia. The Biden administration is not given any negotiating room on the Green New Deal. The masters say, this is the ultimate condition. You must do it. You must do it regardless of anything. And they're doing it. I mean, again, I'm sure our viewers realize that, while Biden has done things like promising to release 1 million barrels a day of oil from the national strategic reserves, which may not even be physically possible, he's taking no step which actually makes it possible in the real world to have large-scale exploration for oil and gas. So the somebody's got to mute. Well, it's hard to do. Okay. Okay, so this is not negotiable. Our adversary says that the Green New Deal is not negotiable. I mean, what else is not negotiable? Drugs, fentanyl is not negotiable. The death toll from drug overdoses, mostly fentanyl, and more fentanyl, and more drug overdoses. I think people generally know it's risen to $100,000, 100,000 persons, 100,000 deaths per year, most recently, and it keeps rising. The US government is forbidden from interfering with the drug trade. They're forbidden from doing anything about the deaths of 100,000 Americans the growing number of deaths of 100,000 Americans per year. I mean, President Trump was very disturbed about it. He attempted to take measures. The only thing he actually was able to do was to negotiate with Xi Jinping for Chinese laws against fentanyl precursors, or fentanyl and fentanyl precursors coming out of China. This had some success for a time, but in the US, he was not allowed to do anything. Governor Chris Christie came to him and suggested formation of a commission. Christie headed the commission. All they were allowed to do, I mean, I don't think anything of Chris Christie. All they did was rewarm well-known proposals for Naxalone antidote, if that's the right way to pronounce it, and drug treatment, nothing more. The numbers of deaths continue. So the masters will not permit reducing the flow of these drugs. And that's something we've got to accomplish. We've got to, I mean, what we've got to do is something Trump, again, wanted to do and was dissuaded, in my view, which is declaring the Mexican cartels to be transnational terrorist organizations and shutting them down. Admittedly, there are other routes to get drugs into the United States, but we can handle those also. I mean, and again, the other thing, which is you're all aware of, is well aware of, is the deindustrialization of the United States and shipping our industry overseas. Trump indeed took steps against this.
No.
There was an increase in industrial employment and manufacturing in the United States. But you know, we still have yet to regain our industries. So what are these things? They're basically policies to dismantle the United States as the leading opponent of the world financial empire based in London. And then, you know, there's numerous others. I mean, our republic has been under continual attack. Really, I mean, since our formation, we've been under continual attack. But in the especially in the post-1971 period, and then since the beginning of this century, there's been an exacerbated attempt to take down our nation. And you know, everybody on the call is well aware of the things which are going on. Critical race theory. I mean, I was recently discussing that with somebody else. I mean, I cited in the article I wrote Aldous Huxley's Brave New World as in some respects, a model for the attack on the United States and the rest of the world today. And as people know who've read the book, what the lead character, Winston Smith, does for a living is rewrite history. History, in his case, is the printed editions of the Times of London. And he's assigned to change old articles in the Times of London to change past history as the ruling class of Britain or Oceania believes it should have been written. So they're continually changing the old issues of the London Times so as to change past history in the way they think it should be told. And this is precisely what the CRT does, among many other poisonous and noxious things. It says that the true accounts, especially of our history as the United States, have to be tossed out and replaced by a competing false narrative of the history of the United States. We have an epidemic, as Chris Rufo has helped to expose it, among other things, of grooming young children in schools to become homosexuals. Again, I mean, why? In order to take down the United States as a nation. We have the George Soros campaign. He's part of this British ruling group, even though he's ethnically Hungarian or not Hungarian Jew. But we have the George Soros campaign to legalize crime, especially by changing laws and by electing prosecutors who will refuse to prosecute crimes or many crimes, the crimes Soros doesn't want prosecuted. So, I mean, I think that's a beginning to place what we're looking at this moment, which among other things is the unfolding of the supposed sanctions against Russia, which, as I began by saying, they're really much older in design than the Russian attack on Ukraine and much broader in purpose. And I've attempted to place them within a world campaign of the oligarchy, which I've located especially with reference to the global green agenda, because it's so central to their whole thinking, and because they acknowledge what's evident in the other things they're doing, that the world, in their view, is overpopulated. A lot of people should die, especially darker skinned people, but not exclusively. And as I said earlier, I'll just finish by saying or let me finish by putting it this way, that the extreme form of this apocalyptic program, which Biden referred to as the New World Order in the White House, its current extreme form is due to the desperation of the adversary at the fight shown by the American people, by the fact that we can take back the legislature, we can take back the White House, and we can, as we've been campaigning through our website and elsewhere, we can restore the historic American system of economics, which made us, for significant parts of our history, when it was applied, which made us the world's leading agro-industrial and scientific power. And as we've said, the place to start on that, broadly speaking, is to bankrupt the Federal Reserve and introduce a national bank of the United States. So I think that's more than enough to begin. Thanks.